However, it is very clear that human beings indeed do have the capacity to invent religion, to invent gods. If we're honest in our approach to defending the faith, we must admit this right up front. Because you see, man does have the ability to project ideas, to project wishes. And certainly we have the ability and propensity to be engaged in fantasy. This is no secret. We all know this. And it is obviously the case that where confusion reigns, people are apt to invent gods or a god. But let's begin defending the faith right there on that point. Here is your first indication that there's a big problem with the idea of these well-known false religions and the gods they created. Do we really think that Yahweh, the God of the Bible, is the one that man would create? Is that the one we would create? Look around. Look at all the Greek pantheon of gods. Think of as many of those God characters as you can. They bear no resemblance to the God of the Bible. Man would not invent a God who is holy. Man would not invent a God who demands obedience. Man would not invent a God who demands obedience with the threat of everlasting torment if we fail. Now think about that. Think about that. Whenever this claim is made that all the religions are the same, we just make them up, they come out of our minds, think about that. Why would we create a God who demands us to be obedient? If we wanted to create a God for our lives here in this world today, we certainly would not create one who demands that we serve him. We would create one that serves us and gives us what we want, like a genie in the bottle. In fact, on a side note here, the God of the prosperity gospel looks an awful lot like the type of being that man would create. That genie in the bottle who is eager to bring you riches and happiness and promises of health. But this is not the character of the Most High God of the Bible. Christianity is not in harmony with man-made systems of religion. But now let's step aside from that line of argumentation for now to focus on the point of this message, which is, why atheism? Is God hidden? Does man have an excuse for his denial of God? Clearly, no. There is a God who has so clearly and manifestly demonstrated his existence to mankind that knowledge of him is virtually inescapable. This is a much better explanation as to why there are so many false religions in existence. Man clearly has the instinct to recognize that there is a transcendent cause for his existence, even if he is so often apt to corrupt and personalize God through idolatry and self-exaltation. The point to be made here in the form of answering atheist objections is this. To the atheist, I would say, I have granted to you that even though they are not like the Christian God, mankind is obviously psychologically motivated to create gods and religions. Are you willing to grant me that there are also powerful psychological motives for man to deny the existence of God, a being who demands accountability from you? I have found that that is certainly the case, that there are people for whom the worst possible news they could ever discover is that there is a God who will hold them accountable for their choices and the way they chose to conduct their lives. That's the kind of person I encounter quite a lot. People who don't want there to be a God. if I'm in disobedience to a God who can create universes, then I'm in a terribly perilous condition. And I might just be more willing to convince myself of 100 different reasons why I should deny his existence rather than to acknowledge and submit to him. Because if I were to acknowledge him, then I would have to be obedient to his law. And then I would have to change my life. And that is unacceptable. I am the God of my life. That's the essence of the atheist argument. You see, nobody is truly neutral on this question. I've yet to meet anyone who just had no opinion one way or the other. That is because there is no neutral position when it comes to moral responsibility. One either attributes morality to an objective lawgiver, or he makes himself the God of his world. There is no other position except the objective moral lawgiver, or make yourself the God of your world. And the latter is the heart of moral relativism, which is a truly untenable worldview. You know, they're always very quick to fold their arms and say, give me your best piece of evidence. And they don't really want the evidence. So here's my disclaimer whenever I have this encounter with a skeptical denier. I would say something like, I'm happy to debate this with you as long as you want. And I'll do my very best to answer as many questions as I possibly can. But I'm going to be honest with you right from the start. I don't trust you. I think you're trying as hard as you can to suppress or disallow any knowledge of God by using sophistry and allowing your pride to envelop your thinking so that you don't have to be accountable to God. If you really want to know God, I can introduce you to him right now. Otherwise, I no longer volley with those who play skeptic for sport. That's my position. I'm very much willing to share with anyone. But you have to want to know God first. If you want to play skeptic, I don't do that game. In fact, if I did do that game, I might say something like, well, why don't you prove to me that you exist? And then everything he says, I would just deny it and say, well, how do I know I'm not hallucinating? How do I know this or that? It's very easy to play skeptic, to plug your ears and eyes and not allow anything to be offered. Anyone can do that. It's not very sophisticated. But you might say, is this a biblical approach, one I've just explained? We've just learned that it is. The New Testament declares it. The Apostle Paul pulls no punches. Neither should I. Neither should you. This is where it gets interesting. Atheism is not a normal response to man's experience of reality. You see, our usual instinct is not to turn God's revelation into atheism. Atheism is an aberration within the mind of mankind. It is a wholly misguided mindset that has no basis in reality. It comes from nothing in reality. It is an irrational worldview. In fact, it's not even a worldview because it is highly subjective and relative from one denier to the next. In fact, atheism happens to be an emotional system of belief, perhaps even a religious system of belief, that can be shown through modern psychology to possibly be the result of some trauma, or, as the atheist always says, some deep-seated need. So if we're going to debate the existence of God, we ought to consider the psychology that we're dealing with first. Because if we're talking about Yahweh, if we're talking about God with us in the flesh, Jesus Christ, then we are talking about a God that people have a driving passion to deny. So, my brothers and sisters, fellow followers of Jesus Christ, don't be mesmerized, intimidated, or persuaded by the flashy, confident arguments of atheism and street epistemology, especially when they tell you that you only believe because you need to, because you have a psychological need for God, because we know better than that now, don't we? We know that they have every psychological need and desire to deny God, and that their need to deny God has clouded their judgment so severely that they can't even see the majesty of the creation in which they live and breathe every day. Don't be intimidated, my friends.